Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'll put a link to PayPal if you'd like to support the channel, and where we left off was on the floor of Siena Cathedral in Italy, where we have this image of even labelled Hermes, Mercurius, Trismegistus, which is zero to do with Christianity. What is this doing in this particular cathedral, and what does it lead to? Well, here's another image, Mercurius Trismegistus, again Mercurius or Mercury, Roman god of knowledge, science, weights and measures, navigation, etc. And so Hermes, the Greek name, or Mercury in Rome, you notice both of them, well, he's wearing the traveller's cap, which is off his head at the moment, but we have the winged feet. We also have the caduceus, which is two snakes wound about the rod. The caduceus, so there's a simplified version on the Greek pottery. Caduceus was a magic wand of an olive branch extended to him by Apollo. Wand translates to measuring rod, god of weights and measures. Now in the this image again, we see the snake, the rod with two snakes around there. I'll put a link in the description to a series I did, Magic Wands, Ancient Science, go through the story of how Apollo got his lyre and how Hermes got the, or Mercury got the caduceus, which relates nicely to this image of Thoth from Temple of Seti I, where we have the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt on top of a snake. Two rods, but each rod has a snake wound around them. And who was Thoth? Well, just like Hermes, just like Mercury, was the god of knowledge, science, linked to, again, geometry, architecture, also the god of weights and measures. So this is here in Sydney at the GPO, General Post Office building, where we see the version. This is, again, you'll find this everywhere, especially connected to banking, the post office or customs house, any building that has to do with trade and, well, commerce. And why does that relate with commerce? Because these were the gods of science, gods of weights and measures, but especially Hermes and Mercury were also the gods of commerce, and also related to the seven liberal arts, especially arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And you also see how this is so important in, well, many others, but even to, especially the modern Freemasons, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, the quadrivium of the seven liberal arts. And while we're on the caduceus, I should mention that because in this picture you don't see it, so I'll just bring up this image. So just off to the side there, we see the two Greek, the female sphinxes, and see how their tails are interrelated. Well, that's similar to from Azov of Basil Valentine, but again, the caduceus with these the imagery linked to there. But in regards, these are the gods of commerce, especially. They also have the gods of navigation. What does a merchant have to do? He has to travel, whether by land or by sea. He needs to navigate. He's a traveller, and he has to deal with weights and measures, and he's dealing with, well, metallurgy, for instance, and other trade goods, medicines, which is also within the sphere of Hermes, Mercury, and Thoth, are the gods of botany and medicine as well, or related to that. So here in Sydney at the Arthur Phillip fountain, we have Mercury, we have Vulcan, and Demeter series, but we have, well, Mercury, Hermes, the caduceus, it's a lady, commerce. Now, just a short distance away outside the new building, commerce building, commercial exchange building, they kept the old statue from the old building, the Lady of Commerce, and again, with the caduceus connected there. So gods of commerce, science, well, back to Nicholas Copernicus, not only famous for his astronomy, he was also a mathematician, and he's credited with the early development of what's called Gresham's law, key economic theory in regards to money. And that will bring us nicely to Cosimo de Medici, banker and politician. Major patron of the arts, architecture. He was vital in the reintroduction of Hermeticism, and again I'm going to use that term loosely, to Western Europe. Now, it's usually stated that Cosimo de Medici reintroduced the Corpus Hermetica or the Hermeticum to Western Europe via Byzantium. Now, what is Byzantium? That's the Eastern Roman Empire that survived for 1,000 years after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. I'll show you that in a moment. But he sent out a fellow by the name of Leonardo di Pistoia, also Alberti di Candia. He was commissioned to go search for ancient Greek and Latin texts in what was Byzantium. He found 19 books which became known as the Corpus Hermeticum in Macedonia. He brought them back to Florence, and then Cosimo de Medici asked Marsilio Ficini to translate them into Latin. So these are some of the oldest, maybe the original, but the oldest versions. I've cut out this piece and highlighted it because we see Cosimo de Medici patron, the patron of this, and of course it also lists Mercurius Trismegistus, or Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, as we see there. So sometimes Hermes Trismegistus, sometimes Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus, sometimes, it's the same, leading back to the same fellow, which is Hermes or Mercury, these pagan gods of commerce, navigation, trade, science, and in general terms. And so why is these images? So Constantinople, formerly Byzantium, the city, become known as Constantinople when Constantine the Great renamed it. Well, in the future anyway, we'll also be looking at how Baghdad and the House of Wisdom was very important in preserving these various ancient texts, which are now just bundled together under the name of Hermes, and how the Islamic Spain, especially through the Alhambra, this knowledge was also entered Europe from this particular side. So the focus has usually been from the east, but via the Alhambra, the Spanish Moors, how this was also a major source of ancient texts back into Europe, which reinvigorated and led to the Renaissance and that explosion of art and science. House of Wisdom, great book, can't highlight it enough. I sort of mentioned it in a recent video on how did Al-Mamun know to enter the pyramid, and suggested that because he was reading these ancient Greco-Roman texts which talk about the Great Pyramid in some detail, he was able to find his way directly in. I'll link that in the description too. But this will be also about the Egyptian origins and influence of this generic stream, like this whole stream, which is Hermeticism. I haven't read this, I really want to, but by Akasha El Daily, and Egyptology, and how the early Islamic era, especially around Baghdad, were very interested in Egyptology and how extended was that. I'll link I think it was a very recent upload in regards to Arab alchemical imagery, how it connects to later European imagery, but also possibly hinting at Egyptian links. And that will be sort of relevant because Athanasius Kirsch is a very famous Jesuit scholar, published so many books, including one called the Oedipus Egyptiacus, which is full of Egypt as well, some including the Ouroboros here as well. Famous person worth noting around the 2nd century AD, Clement, the Bishop of Alexandria, witnessed the priests and priestesses of Hermes or Thoth parading with their 42 sacred books. This is a number often it can be found in the Book of the Dead, for instance, in multiple respects. Seems to be connected to Thoth, but we'll come back to Clement and what the Christians, especially the ones not in Rome necessarily, but Constantinople. Now, I'm no fan of anyway, but this sort of the Eastern Empire gets overlooked in that sense. And so the heresy of Giordano Bruno, the Hermeticist, as is pointed out by Francis Yates and also in the Forbidden Universe book. However, I think, again, there's more to look at in regards to this and what is really going on there. So we see really its Neoplatonic, Gnostic, Hermetic influence on Christianity. Now, the focus has been, and I sort of got drawn into it, I must admit, and just by doing this, I've realised, we'll see that there's a lot more to it than that, and it's a bit become a trend, a fashion to promote Hermeticism without really including more of these other Neoplatonic, Gnostic aspects in regards to this. So Gnosticism, Illuminati, Neoplatonism, and Hermeticism, especially Illuminati, and I'll do more, but so a while back I did some of these videos. I looked to old encyclopedias and dictionaries, and when you look back in not so long ago, the Illuminati was not controversial at all. There are several descriptions of what Illuminati was, and so firstly using this 1828, the name of a sect of heretics who sprung up in Spain about the year 1575, who afterward appeared in France. Their principal doctrine was that by means of sublime prayer they had attained so perfect a state to have no need of ordinances, sacraments, and good works. Basically, they said, we don't need the church. We can do this, on our own. We don't need the Pope. We don't need the bishops. This was very, of course, dangerous at that time. This is Webster's from about 1930, but the Illuminati, okay, they have different descriptions, but certain heretics, the Alumbrades or Alumbrados, who sprang up in Spain, then they appeared in France. Their principal doctrine was by mental prayer they had attained, again, so perfect a state. Now, underneath we have the Adam Weishaupt description of the Illuminati and what they came from. A lot to be said about that, but this earlier Illuminati. And Webster's Dictionary, members of a French sect foregoing under the name Illuminés, they were the original Illuminati, or one of the people who had that term attached to them. Now, Odom's Dictionary, 1946, essentially saying the same thing. And they're very similar. I'll go into more in next few episodes. The Gnostics, or the Neoplatonists, and their views of man's relationship to God, essentially. They had where it was more personal and more direct, as where the church was, to simplify it, but virtually said, you're a bunch of useless sinners. Only through the church and through the sacraments can you enter heaven. These early Illuminati, the Alumbrades and similar groups, including to a certain respect the Cathars, they had very, very different views to what the church was, and these groups were eliminated, suppressed in crusades. That before the Crusaders left for the Holy Land, well, there was other crusades in Europe to eliminate these types of groups. Illuminati, Columbia Encyclopedia. Other groups have called themselves Illuminati, especially a mystical sect in Spain and France. These are the Alumbrades. But the Rosicrucians also called themselves Illuminati. So, similar to with the Gnostics, they believe that through a personal relationship to God, but also through study and by understanding nature. If you understand art and philosophy and nature, you don't need the church. You don't need the bishops. You don't need, you can do and achieve these things on your own. And again, this focus on study and knowledge and science, which is very similar to the Adam Weishaupt type of Illuminati, which basically believed in women property rights, universal literacy, and the study of science. Now, it's just usually referred to as a rationalist society, but this was the original, earliest days of Adam Weishaupt. There's a lot to suggest that this original Bavarian Illuminati was actually infiltrated. Not that they were the infiltrators of other groups, but their original open-minded views were actually then infiltrated by other groups, and then eventually led to them being turned into something very different from what some of their earliest social welfare, universal literacy type of principles. Okay, so yeah, the older books are better, and hitting the 15-minute mark. So yeah, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, more to come. Have a good one.